Well, here we are. This is class 3 of our course on generative grammar. And as announced, we will be discussing argument structure and theta or theta, you can pronounce it either way, theta role assignment. Well, in our first two classes, we focused our attention on deriving sentences, on syntactic analysis, and basically we said that there are two ways in which we can form sentences. Either way is dependent on an operation called merger, whereby you put together a head and a complement. So back then, and you're kindly invited to watch our first two classes, our first two videos, where we derived the sentence I like tennis, or more specifically I do like tennis. Well, back then we said that you can form a phrase, a verb phrase, for instance, by simply merging a verb and a complement, like tennis. And in so doing, we will be forming a phrase called a verb phrase. Now, the problem with our verb phrase is that it lacks a subject or specifier. That is, we're not specifying who is the person or entity that is undergoing this feeling, sensation of liking tennis. And then we answer that question by stating that our verb phrase will become the complement of a T phrase. So T merges with VP to form T prime, and in turn T prime will merge with a specifier I to form the clause or TP I do like tennis. Well, this is basically a summary of what we said last class, or more specifically in the last two classes, and again, you're kindly invited to watch them so that you can follow our course here. In those classes, we also talked about argument structure. More specifically, we touched upon the issue and we announced that we would discuss them in future classes. Well, here's our class on argument structure and theta role assignment. So what is argument structure? The basic idea here is that there are like three different levels of analysis and they are interrelated. So we will claim that there are three different levels of analysis. One that is semantic, the semantic level, which we will call logical form, and there is a phonological level or PF, that is the level of the utterance, the level at which sentences are either written or spoken. So the logical form is basically what happens in our minds, and it's got to do with the way in which we organize the proposition. We're going to say that a proposition is the semantic, meaning related component or representation of a sentence. So what we are saying here is that we get information on our minds regarding different lexical items, regarding different notions, different ideas. So let us think of the notion of fear. If we think of fear, we need to think of that as some sort of feeling or emotion that is represented by a term, fear. Now, the term fear requires some kind of sensor or experiencer of that fear on the one hand, and on the other hand, it requires some sort of entity that will be feared. So we will be afraid of X. So we need like basically two components. So in our minds, at a logical form level, at LF, what we will call LF, the semantic level, we have information about lexical items such as fear, again an emotion, and what we will say is that fear is a predicator, more technically, right? So predicator is a technical term to refer to lexical items that will be some sort of pivot, in the sense that they will organize the other elements in the logical structure of the proposition. Again, the proposition is the semantic representation of a sentence. So again, fear requires two elements. I fear the dark. That would be a sentence, but on our minds we just have the predicator, we have the lexical item fear, and we know that we need basically two slots. So we will be talking about verbs or predicators that are one place or two places or three places. In the case of fear, we got a predicator that is a two-place verb or a two-place predicator, and the reason is that the verb, as stated, requires an experiencer, someone that is gonna feel the fear, someone that is going to be afraid of X, and the X proper that will be the cause of the fear. So we will call these two entities, these two participants, arguments. So let's go for the categories argument 1 and argument 2, where the arguments will be participants again of the predicator fear. The first participant will be called experiencer, and the second participant will be called theme. So what we're saying now is that fear has two slots, slot number 1 and slot number 2. So these slots will be filled in by arguments, argument 1 and argument 2. And the first argument will be called experiencer. That is the entity that experiences the fear. And the second slot will be filled in by a whole other argument. We will call that argument 2, and it's going to be called theme. So we have the following picture now, where I, the experiencer, fear, predicator, the dark. Now, how do these arguments receive a theta role? Well, at LF, the word fear will logically require that someone will experience the action of fearing, and that there should be some kind of object of our fear. Think about the following. Usually when we say object in a traditional grammar approach or in a generative approach, we're thinking of I fear the dark, where the dark is the object of the verb, but here the object is in a way the thing that causes the fear. So in future classes we will discuss transitivity, and we will see that there is a transitivity or a category transitivity that works in one way, like I fear the dark, where fear is transitive and the dark is the object. But if you come to think of it, the dark is semantically the entity that is causing the fear, so it seems to be going in the opposite direction, like the dark is the cause of my fear and that has an impact on me. So in the future we will be critical of the I would say commonsensical and probably most traditional and conservative notion of transitivity. We are going to see that transitivity can go either way. However, this does not have an important bearing, what happens at semantic level, on the ways in which we're going to organize our sentences. That is, our sentences will still be derived in the same fashion, where fear will be the verb, the dark will be the complement, and I will be the specifier. We will have a representation of such sentence in the near future. Basically, that's what we did in classes 1 and 2. Again, you're kindly invited to watch that, and now we will go on discussing logical form. So we have said, let us quickly repeat that. We have said that fear is the predicator, and basically what it's predicating is that one entity, the experiencer, is experiencing fear in respect to some object which will be the cause of such fear. Such arguments then bear a theta role. So we're going to be saying that arguments bear theta roles, and that they are in fact assigned theta roles by their predicators. So the predicator is typically the theta role assigner, and the arguments are the theta role assignees. So basically what we're saying is that the predicator assigns a theta role or theta roles, and that the arguments receive a theta role. That is why they are called assignees. We will also state that that is stipulated in what we call the Theta or Theta Criterion, which states that all arguments should receive a theta role. That is, all arguments should play a role, clear role, in the structure of the proposition and the structure of the sentence at a logical level. And we would say that each theta role can be assigned to one argument only. So here we have experiencer and theme. We kind of have like two themes or two experiencer theta roles in the same sentence at logical level. So what will happen now is that all this proposition with its predicator and arguments that have received a theta role, that is all that is going on in the mind, will be processed by the syntax. So syntax is the interface level between logical form and phonological form. That is, syntax is the space where all the logical material, all the semantic material is organized, is distributed, so that we can come up with some sort of phonological form, so that we can utter a sentence that will represent and we have correlations with what's going on in our minds at a logical form or semantic level. So let's see what happens at phonological form and how we can organize all the material that comes from our mental representation of fear in this case. The question is, how can we organize it at a phonological level? That is, at the level of uttering, at the level of the utterance. As we will see, I have selected two different ways of uttering, two different ways of syntactically representing the same idea or thought. So if I say I fear the dark, where fear is a verb, we will again have fear as a predicator, I as a specifier, the dark as the object. So basically that's the way in which we put it into words. So material from LF, from the logical form, is manipulated, is organized, is molded, if you like, by the syntax, so that there is some kind of output. That is basically what we finally utter. So we utter I fear the dark. But we have a whole other way of realizing or instantiating, that is uttering, saying, expressing the same kind of semantic content. We can also say I am afraid of the dark. So the same logical material, fear with its two arguments and their respective theta roles, can have different phonological forms. And of course, the sentences will be derived differently. In the near future, we will see how we can derive sentences by means of, as you know, merger operations, different merger operations in the formation of phrases, so that we can put, for instance, the determiner, the, and the noun dark together to form a phrase. We'll see what kind of phrase that is. The million-dollar question here is that a determiner phrase or is that a noun phrase? That is something that we will discuss in the near future. All we're saying here is that I fear the dark and I am afraid of the dark are two different phonological manifestations with their own syntactic derivation and syntactic representation of the same event, let's call it this way, at LF. So at LF, something is happening. We express fear and we have two different participants. Now, at the level of phonological form, we can express these semantic notions by means of two different sentences. We can also think of other predicators. Think of like. For instance, you can say, again, I do like tennis. I do like tennis is quite similar to I am keen on tennis or I am fond of tennis. Of course, that keen, fond, like are similar verbs. Love, I do love tennis. I am keen on tennis. I am fond of tennis. So these predicators, fond, keen, love, like, will all require two arguments. One argument, the experiencer, that is the person. One argument, the experiencer, that is the entity that experiences or senses or undergoes the liking. And a whole other argument, that is the object of our liking, which in fact, I will argue, is the cause of our liking something, because when we like something, when we're fond of something, when we are keen on something, we are experiencing this feeling or emotion. So what I'm trying to say here, in other words, is that the phonological form, the way in which we express sentences, again, I am keen on tennis, I like tennis, I love tennis, or I fear the dark, or I am afraid of the dark. The different phonological forms are derived or come from some, core semantic notions. A feeling that requires an entity, again, that experiences the feeling, and an entity that is the object of such feeling. So what I'm trying to say is that at logical form, there are no categories. We can tell that there are categories at a syntactic level. That's where the categories get picked, and they are realized at a phonological level, but we do not tell the difference between fear, verb, or afraid, adjective at a logical form level. Logical form is more like the raw material that the syntax will process. Only then will we come out with a sentence that will enable us to state what we feel. In this case, fear. I fear the dark, or I am afraid of the dark. In my language, in my L1, my mother tongue, Spanish, we say something like, yo le tengo miedo a la oscuridad. If we translate that into English, it will be something like, I have fear of the darkness, or I have fear to the darkness. There's some kind of preposition there, right? But we say I have fear in Spanish. Yo tengo miedo. So different languages will realize the notion of fear in different ways, by means of verbs, by means of adjectives, by means of nouns, like, again, fear, verb, afraid, adjective, or miedo, fear again, and we say I have fear of the dark. That's what we say in Spanish. So the fact that there are different categories in the same language, I fear the dark and I am afraid of the dark, and if we move into other languages such as Spanish, I have fear of the dark, yo le temo a la oscuridad. The fact that we have different categories only means that we can express the same core notion at logical form in different ways. And of course, at a pragmatic level, at the level of performance, to say I fear the dark will be different from I am afraid of the dark, and that in turn will be different from I have fear of the dark, which is basically my translation of what we say in Spanish, yo le tengo miedo a la oscuridad. However, the fact that there are different ways of putting it, there are different ways of instantiating it, the fact that there are different shades of meaning is not relevant for our derivation of sentences at a phonological level, for the fact that the syntax organizes the material that is present at a logical form, and basically what we are saying is that generative grammar is concerned with the way in which logical form propositions, that is predicators and arguments with their theta roles, are processed by the syntax and are realized, again, phonologically, orthographically, at the level of the utterance. Whether there are differences between the ways in which we express fear, that is by means of different categories and different sentences at the level of the utterance, is something that pragmaticians will be concerned with. There is linguists who are concerned with language use and the reasons why we say A rather than B. But generative grammarians are concerned with competence, with what happens in the mind. A generative grammarian, generative grammar, is a grammar of the mind. Of course, we're discussing here how this grammar that is cognitive and this syntax that is also cognitive in the end get to be realized phonologically. But again, whether we say A, B, or C, and the reasons why we say that, and the possible shades of meaning will be dealt with by semanticists, pragmaticians, and all other linguists that are concerned with language in use. Here what we're concerned with is basically competence, not performance. More about competence and performance in our next class. I hope that you have enjoyed this class, and again, bear in mind that we need to be really patient if you want to get your generative grammar right, because we've just had 3 classes and it's like very little and we need to move on, and I think that we have moved on. We have analyzed the phrase, we have analyzed a sentence, and we have analyzed also the semantic structure or the semantic core or proposition or propositional content of our sentences, and we have discussed the way in which all this material is processed by the syntax and realized phonologically. So if you have liked this class, please like it, subscribe to our channel so that we can keep you posted, and share it with your fellow students. Bye bye for now. See ya.